Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I'm police officers, okay? What I need you to do is follow my instructions very carefully.
The moment armed police move in on terrorist Mohammed Farouk outside the hospital he planned to bomb.
Come to the front of the bonnet here.
Just come here.
Good man. Keep your hands up bonnet for us, pal. Yeah, just that's fine. Keep your hands up bonnet there.
Radicalised online by Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Farouk was preparing to kill as many nurses as possible here at Leeds' world-renowned St James's Hospital.
Subject secure, mate.
It was a brave member of the public, a patient at the hospital, who noticed Farouk acting suspiciously as he prepared to plant his device in a hospital cafe. He engaged him in conversation and managed to talk him down, persuading Farouk to take his pressure cooker bomb over to a bench further away from the main entrance before calling the police.
What's this pistol you might have? Have you got a gun? Somewhere? Somewhere. Lower.
A search of Farouk and his vehicle found this imitation handgun and 2 knives. And as they continued to talk to him, they realised the full extent of his deadly attack plan.
There's a bug there, it's got a bomb in it.
What's in it?
There's a bomb inside.
There's a bomb inside.
That pressure cooker bomb was stuffed with 10 kilograms of gunpowder. Farouk's trial was told it was intended to be twice as powerful as the 2 pressure cooker devices that terrorists in the US used to bomb the Boston Marathon in 2013, killing 3 and injuring hundreds of others.
A pressure cooker, and what's in it?
So it's not live.
Gunpowder.
There's gunpowder in a pressure cooker. I need to thoroughly search this gentleman. There's gunpowder in his pockets and blanks.
Farouk's original target had been the top-secret US military installation at RAF Menwith Hill in North Yorkshire, believing the base had been used to coordinate drone strikes against ISIS. But he couldn't get close enough to plant the device. His second choice was St James's, where he'd been employed as a clinical support worker and had a grievance against several of his former colleagues. It was the second time in just over a year that Islamist terrorists had tried to bomb a far softer hospital target. The attack on the Liverpool Maternity Hospital had also failed, the only fatality the bomber himself when his device detonated prematurely. Now another terrorist is off the streets and behind bars, but prosecutors say there would have been many deaths and injuries, but for the brave patient who managed to talk Mohammed Farouk down from his deadly plan. Mark White, GB News.
Islamist terrorists follow the Prophet Muhammad's examples, whether they're true or not. Welcome back to Training Tuesday here. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, the Islamist terrorist who planned to detonate a bomb at a hospital was found guilty this summer. Mohammed Farouk's device was, as you just heard there, twice as powerful as the pressure cooker bombs that were used at the Boston Marathon. And yet, all we hear about is the threat of the far right, not just in the UK, but even here. And I got a hat tip Tommy Robinson for posting that video and for those words there. Thank you very much, Tommy, for keeping everybody apprised of what the big picture is around this issue. But the big question is why these Islamists use tactics and strategies that intentionally target civilians. Why do they use barbaric attack methods that belong in the 11th or 12th century instead of the 21st century, or maybe the 7th century? And as we move further down our current path, Will the Islamist jihadis working for Iran who've infiltrated America through its southern border be able to achieve their dream of following Muhammad's example of causing mass civilian casualties as much as possible and use a nuclear weapon attack on our country? It's critically important we understand the real Muhammad because of the use of his so-called examples in Islamic tradition and religious writings, whether they are true or not, because as you can see, they are used by today's jihadists. And my guest today is author Robert Spencer. He's got a new book out titled Muhammad, A Critical Biography, which takes a detailed look at these Islamic traditions regarding the prophet and lays bare their contradictions, inconsistencies, and incoherence. Robert, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Good to see you, Colonel. Thank you very much.
Well, I guess this is your third book, I think, on Muhammad himself. Why did you need to write another book? I mean, what's the difference, I guess, between the three books, so folks have a better understanding of why this book's important?
Yeah, the new book is exploration of whether these things actually happened or not, which, of course, has a lot of implications for Islamic jihadis like Farouk that you just were showing, because they're doing all this based on Muhammad's example. And if Muhammad never really even existed or didn't do these things, then we might be able to persuade at least some of these jihadis or would-be jihadis to stand down. And so that's what's different about this book from my earlier books on Muhammad, but it also contains all the information that I think will still be eye-opening to a lot of Americans about just how bad an individual Muhammad is, according to the Islamic traditions about him, whether or not they're historically accurate. And it's even worse. A lot of people know that he led armies and ordered the assassination of his enemies and married a 9-year-old girl and so on, but it's even worse than that.
Why do we not know very much about this individual? You know, I mean, look, I'm a Christian, and if I want to, I can read probably billions of pages about Jesus of Nazareth, and you point out in your book that I mean, none of those authors are afraid to do something like say the guy didn't exist, but there's just very little academic work on this on the Prophet Muhammad, and on top of that, there's not a whole lot in the actual documents that we do have available from centuries ago about his beginnings. So I guess there's two questions in that.
Yeah, well, you know, people assume that the Quran is all about Muhammad. But actually, Muhammad, the name, is only mentioned 4 times in the Quran. None of those have any biographical information about him. There's no information, as a matter of fact, about him in the Quran at all. And so you have to go to the Hadith, to Islamic tradition, to find out about what Muhammad said and did, which is very important because the Quran does tell Muslims to obey Muhammad and do what he says, and yet it doesn't tell you what exactly he did say. So you go to the Islamic traditions, but the problem is those are 200 years, written 200 years after the time of Muhammad. So when it comes to Jesus, you have the New Testament that is written, the Gospels written within the lifetime of the people who knew him, and so on. With Muhammad, there's just silence for 200 years after he's supposed to have died. It's as if we're only now getting a biography of Thomas Jefferson. That's what it would be like.
Yeah, I mean, with Jesus Christ or Moses even, I mean, we know the stories from their birth, in Christ's instance, from his conception, and all the way through to their deaths with very few gaps in the history between them growing up. But the Quran only mentions this guy 4 times?
That's right, and none of those mentions tell us anything about his life. And what we're from around the time the Quran is supposed to have been written, that most people assume it was written, although I actually think it was written later. But around that time, there's also no sign of the Prophet of Islam. There are a couple of mentions of Muhammad here and there, but none of them correspond to what Islamic tradition tells us about Muhammad. Now, we have very detailed information about Muhammad from 200 years after his life, but nothing before that. which means that there can be no end of myths and legends that become part of the story before we even hear about it.
Yeah, as I was going through the historical part of the book where you're laying out timelines, Robert, I was fascinated to see that there's a big question about whether this guy was even talked about by Muslims before we know about him. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the Arab leaders and some Muslims in the early days. I mean, this guy wasn't even mentioned, was he?
Yeah. No, and see, this is very important because if you take, for example, the comparison with Jesus again, within the first 50 years after Jesus lived, you have churches being established all over Europe and the Middle East. You have people talking about Christ and the Christians. And those are also non-Christians who talk about this new movement. Now, the same period, 50 years after Muhammad is supposed to have died, you have the Arabs conquering this huge expanse of territory from North Africa through the Middle East, through Iran, and even parts of India. And all of that is supposed to have been inspired by Muhammad and the Quran. And yet, when you look at the actual records of the time, there's no mention of the Quran and very little mention of Muhammad. And nobody, even the people who write extensively about the conquests, seem to have any idea that these people are coming with a new religion and a new prophet and a new holy book.
Yeah, and the early concepts around Islam itself is that there was this messenger, I guess, that had an experience with an angel. I think the Quran says it's Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, and everything. But it seems to me they were like, well, we're sons of Abraham, so we believe in the God of Abraham, the one God, the one true God. And even initially, based on your book, there were positive things said about Christianity.
Yeah.
And then something happened later on, I guess.
Yeah, the Quran says that it confirms the Torah and the gospel, and that all the Jews and Christians have to do is look into the books that they've got, and they'll see that the Quran is true. Then the Jews and the Christians looked into the books that they had and said, this is not the same thing. And so what your book is saying does not correspond to our books. And then the Muslims began to say, you have actually corrupted your scriptures to take out mention of Muhammad and Islam. And that is a standard Islamic view to this day, which is one of the reasons why Jews and Christians have to be fought, because they're such enemies of Allah that they actually tampered with the scriptures he gave them. But in reality, the Quran tells Jews and Christians to follow what they've got in the Torah and the gospel, assuming that it will confirm the Quran, which of course they don't.
That's fascinating because, in modern times, which is why I showed that clip, you have these jihadists out here. If they have anything that looks like an example from the Prophet Muhammad when it comes to warfare, especially, they're following it, whether it's true or not. And it would be just fascinating to see if we could reveal the actual truth. Unfortunately, there's probably not enough historical data to prove it for people that are in this faith at this point. So is Muhammad, we got about a minute before the first break, sir, is Muhammad in the Bible?
Well, the Muslims claim that he is. And they claim that there are a couple of passages that mention Muhammad because the name means the praised one. And so there's this passage in Song of Songs and another one where the praised one is mentioned. But that actually only works against their claims because it indicates that it's more likely that the name Muhammad was a title first. There was nobody named Muhammad before Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. And it does seem as if this was a title that was given to other eminent people before he came on the scene. It may be that some of the early mentions of Muhammad, since they don't correspond to what Islamic tradition tells us about him, they may be referring to somebody else altogether. And so the short answer is no, Muhammad's not in the Bible, but there are some passages that Muslims use to claim that he is, to try to confuse Jews and Christians who are uninformed.
That's an interesting take. They try to confuse Jews and Christians who are uninformed that follow the Bible and the Torah. Well, sir, we've got to take a commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk more about why these jihadis use such barbaric attack methods, because there are whole kinds of technologies and everything available to them where they wouldn't have to intentionally target civilians and kill women and children or target them, whether they're successful or not. But they continue to follow this path that they believe is set by the Prophet Muhammad. We'll be right back with Robert Spencer.
Hello, I'm Brandon House, and I want to tell you about Numi. This is a swish. You just take 2 capfuls, swish it around your mouth for 3 to 4 minutes, and you're absorbing, according to the studies, glutathione. Now, you don't need to take my word for it. There are over 162,000 studies on PubMed on the power of glutathione. It is a powerful molecule that studies show detoxes our cells. Some studies even show that, well, glutathione might remove mercury from our brains, help to prevent things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Now look, I'm not making claims. I'm just telling you what the research is showing about the powerful molecule glutathione. Numi is the product that contains glutathione. Melissa and I swish with this twice a day. We urge you to go to Numi.com/house1. That's Numi, Neumi.com/HOWSE and the numeral 1. Begin finding out about the power of glutathione while also supporting this broadcast network. Thank you.
By the way, I have to beat up on the UK just one additional thing. I was talking with a friend recently, and we were talking about, one of the big dangers in the world, of course, is nuclear proliferation, though, of course, the Biden administration doesn't care about it. And I was talking about, what is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over. But to my Tory friends, I have to say, you guys have got to get a handle on this, but neither here nor there.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and we're talking about why Islamist jihadist terrorists follow Muhammad's examples, whether they're true or not, in religious books like the Quran and other writings like the Hadith. And the author of his new book, Muhammad, A Critical Biography, Robert Spencer, is with us today. Robert, I wanted to show that clip because a nuclear weapon is still the most powerful, destructive, and killing device that human beings have ever created. And in nuclear deterrence, understanding the mind of your adversary, because that's what nuclear weapons are used to try to do, is deter nuclear war and deter other great power wars. But understanding the mind of your adversary and how they think about risk decision making is critical, and that's why this subject is very important to me, having been involved in the global war on terror and dealing with Islamist jihadists for over 3 decades in my military career. This is critically important that Americans in the West understand this. And JD's point about the UK possibly being the first truly nuclear weapon Islamic state is not far from becoming a reality.
Unfortunately, it's quite close to becoming a reality. He was absolutely right. What he said was not politically correct, but the Labour Party has been accommodating Islamic jihadis. There were recently demonstrations by British natives against mass migration, saying that their whole culture and their whole nation was being overwhelmed, and yet the British government, instead of addressing the concerns of the natives, cracked down very hard. There are people now in prison in Britain just for saying things that were considered offensive, including Allah, Allah, who the F is Allah, which is really just kind of a meaningless taunt, an insignificant chant, and yet they're in prison for saying this while Islamic jihadis and their allies committed acts of open violence and were coddled by the police, and the police turned a blind eye. So J.D. Vance has a very important point in this case, that Britain is in very real danger of being Islamized with the willing and eager help of the left that just looks at Muslims as being a vote bank that they can tap into to keep their majority.
Yeah, I mean, after all of these years of jihadists, and you even say in your book that if Muhammad was alive today, he'd probably be the head of ISIS. And ISIS is the most despicable, barbaric of all of them, from what we've seen of their brutality and their tactics of killing people. Of all of these decades, why is it that these countries in the West, like ours, obviously, why don't we get it from the elite academic perspective? I mean, you rattle off in your book all sorts of names of apologists for Islam, and I'm just trying to get to the lever here to try to change the tracks so that we're on the track of recognizing reality instead of living in some delusional world that doesn't really exist, because that's what's happening.
You know, Colonel, it's been moving in the other direction for years now. In the early part of the 21st century, I was a trainer for the FBI and for the military on issues regarding Islam and jihad. And I would go and speak to groups, take them into the mindset of the terrorists, help them to understand what Muhammad taught, what the Quran taught, so that they would see the motives and goals of the people that we were facing. Just like you were saying, you have to know your enemy. And in 2011, I was fired by the Obama administration, which removed all mention of Islam and jihad from counterterror training. And they were relying on academics. As you noted, the academic establishment has been out to lunch on this. The academics who were saying Islam is a religion of peace and it's completely benign, and so Spencer is just Islamophobic and so on. Now, this was much bigger than just me. The whole U.S. government rejected, as a matter of policy at that time, under the direction of Obama, rejected any mention of Islam and jihad in connection with terrorism. And that's been the official U.S. government stance ever since. And so this book, Muhammad, A Critical Biography, if the people who were running our response to jihad terrorism were to read it, they would understand why these guys are coming at us, what we can do to stop them, what they are trying to accomplish, and so on. But they are forbidden, as a matter of the policy of the United States government, from looking into issues like that. And they have to pretend that there really isn't any such thing as Islamic jihad terrorism at all.
Yeah, I think one of the most troubling parts of what you just said was, I remember because I was a young officer on the Joint Staff, as a matter of fact, and your materials were being used to train our professional military officers in our PME, professional military education. And these officers are all going to be commanders eventually in the war, just like I was. I ended up being a squadron commander in the war, and ultimately was a wing commander when at my last impact with the war on terror at the end of my career. So it was very important that we received that education and training, which my generation did, but the generations that came after me that ended up being at the end of like the war in Afghanistan had totally been dropped out of that education, and I think that's part of what's created the disaster. Robert, we've got a question over in the live audience. Let's go ahead and take that before we get to the end of this break. I know we got to let you go here after this segment, but go ahead, Shell.
We have Sofa, sir.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you, Doctor. I would like to know if you believe that the ambiguity of the life of Muhammad was intentional. If you read the Hadith or the Tar, it you understand that there's only a handful of years that Muhammad was actually in war, but because there's nothing written about him in the Quran, Muslims act as if he spent his entire life at war.
Well, the passages that call for war in the Quran are considered to supersede the passages that are peaceful. But you're right, the ambiguity is very much there, especially in the traditions. And it seems to me, as you'll see in the book, that it comes from the fact that there were different groups within the early Muslim community, and they disagreed on how they wanted to pursue relations with the outside world. So they have Muhammad being peaceful in some circumstances and violent in others. And so now we have this contradictory tradition that Islamic spokesmen can use, and they have used, to confuse the American people, because they can quote all these passages from the Hadith that show how peaceful Muhammad was and ignore all the violent passages. And then the jihadis can quote the violent passages and ignore the peaceful ones. So everybody can look as if they're representing the authentic Islam.
Wow. It's just very interesting because, I mean, this faith has spread to all four corners of the globe. It is a faith that uses force to convert people. I mean, basically, it's convert or die, in my opinion. When you talk about whether somebody can live in an fully Islamic society or not, that's not a believer in their particular faith. I mean, Christians don't last very long. Jews obviously don't last very long, and atheists definitely don't last very long. Before we let you go, there was this part in the book that I read. I think you're talking about. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was one of the early Arab kings related to Islam, and he minted coins, Arab coins, that had a cross on it. What is the story behind that? Because, I mean, the official Islam story is that Christ was a prophet, but not the Son of God, and wasn't crucified, if I remember correctly.
That's right. And they say that it's offensive that the Christians say that he was crucified, because that would be Allah allowing one of his prophets to be defeated, and he would never do that. And so they think that the cross is particularly offensive. And even there are stories in the Hadith where Muhammad says Jesus will return at the end of the world and break all the crosses. And so the fact that Muawiyah, the early Islamic ruler that you mentioned, minted coins that said Muhammad and had a cross on them shows that either he wasn't paying attention at all to what Islam teaches, which is extremely unlikely, or maybe Islam didn't teach all that yet, because it hadn't been invented yet, and that's what's more likely, and that Islam comes later than most people think. And when the Arabs were conquering all those territories, Islam had not yet been formulated, and was later formulated and made into a martial, aggressive, warlike faith, because it was created by warriors in order to keep their new empire together.
That's fascinating. One big question left, sir, and that is in the mind of this enemy, if somebody is a president of the United States, what's the most important thing to know about how the Islamist jihadist enemy is thinking, especially if they get a nuclear weapon?
Well, for one thing, they will use it. They will use it to destroy Israel. We have to be aware of this, that this cannot be negotiated away. If the president of the United States were savvy about Islam, he would be strong, and he would be helping our allies be strong, because he would understand that no negotiation is going to blunt the force of the divine command that Muslims have to wage jihad and to subjugate the non-Muslim world. And so the only thing we can do is be strong against that.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Mr. Spitzer, where can folks find you, your organization, and the book, most importantly, before I let you go?
Yeah, I'm at jihadwatch.org, which is a news site about jihad activity, updated many times daily, jihadwatch.org. I'm at jihadwatchrs on Twitter, And the book, Muhammad, A Critical Biography, is at Amazon, although they've been taking down positive reviews. So if you like it, leave a positive review, see if they put it up. And it's also at Barnes & Noble and anywhere fine books are sold.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and thank you for your service and the work that you do and continue to do, not just for our country, but for all peace-loving people of the world. It's extremely important that we understand this enemy at a depth that we haven't had to understand an enemy before, because it's that different.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Well, right after the break, we'll see another clip, this time from Tulsi Gabbard, I think, about nuclear weapons and why Biden's policies are enabling these people to potentially attack us on our own soil using a nuclear bomb. And we'll go to the audience again for the last half hour of the show for an open mic on this subject. We'll be right back.
This is one of the main reasons, Sean, that I left the Democrat Party. It is clear, and it has been for some time, that they don't care about the safety, security, or freedom of the American people, and they have become apologists for these Islamist jihadists. And Sean, I got to tell you, for those like me, the many Americans like me who enlisted in the military because of the 9/11 jihadist terrorist attack on us, this is incredibly offensive. You know, I've deployed 3 times to war zones in the Middle East and in Africa. I know how serious this threat of Islamist jihadism is. The Democrat elite, they don't care. They don't care. They leave our borders wide open, which we know are being exploited by these Islamist terrorists. And they redirect our security infrastructure, our assets, our intel assets, not towards focusing on these terror threats that are coming through our borders and elsewhere. They're focusing them on fellow Americans. They're focusing them on people who they have deemed as domestic terrorism threats or extremists, also known as people who are supporters of President Donald Trump or conservatives. And I want to point out, really, Sarah mentioned this, but most importantly, we know that Iran has sleeper terrorist cells here in America. And unlike the Al-Qaeda, these terrorist sleeper cells have the access and capability and may have already brought in nuclear material into this country, waiting to be activated. And if used, could launch an attack here, right here at home, that would make 9/11 look small in comparison. So the graveness of the threats that we face right now, Sean, because of the failures of this administration, the Democrat elite, because they do not care about us, our safety, or our security, this is what we're facing.
Maness Show, it's Training Tuesday, and we've been talking with author Dr. Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, and author of a new book, his latest on the Prophet Muhammad, A Critical Biography, about the mind of the jihadist terrorist, the jihadist warrior, the soldier, whatever you want to call them, the jihadists, and why they follow the examples of this Muhammad character, whether it's real, whether they're real or not. The religion of Islam has created an image of the Prophet Muhammad where he's infallible, and when you go back and read the history, that's actually not accurate. But that's where we're at today, and what Congresswoman Gabbard points out there, former Congresswoman Gabbard, and Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, by the way, is that the Biden open border policy has allowed adversary individuals to enter this country and not be monitored. And she even said it out loud that the Iranian Islamists have sleeper cells in the United States. And you're hearing about reporting on some of this stuff in association with the assassination attempts on President Trump. I haven't seen anything that's actually confirmed that with evidence yet, but don't be surprised if it becomes accurate, known as accurate reporting, because this has been going on for over 3 years now. I ran on border security for my U.S. Senate race in 2014 as the #1 issue, and that was from the Obama administration. So they're coming in. They are here already. They've been here, many of them, for years, if not a decade or more. If we go back to the Obama administration. So they're well ensconced, they're established, and they're able to get new people in through this open southern border policy it's open like it's never been before, not even in the Obama administration. So it's very concerning. And yes, I believe that there are several sleeper cells here that are not associated with anything to do with the former president of the United States and future president, I might add. I support him. And I suggest you do too, because the other side, this is your choice. Nuclear weapons on American soil. Yeah, 9/11 will be a tiny pinprick compared to that. Well, let's go to our audience and take some more questions about this, because this is always a subject that sparks not only interest, but people, Americans, no matter what their faith or non-faith is, have a vested interest in understanding this particular enemy and the way he or she thinks and why, in order to defeat it, because it must be defeated no matter what. Go ahead, Shel.
With Deb first, sir.
Thank you, Shel. Colonel, I had the privilege of speaking with one of the dads at baseball who happened to be a Marine Corps captain and has quite an impressive resume over in the other side of the world as well. And we were discussing the difference between how the peaceful is always put out in front, especially in an open border situation, and that the deception is hidden in the background. So, like, I would love to hear your thoughts on the difference in the peaceful local level that they portray, and as you grow into the global connection, how dangerous it truly gets. Thank you for this wonderful show.
Just to clarify, are you talking about the supposed peaceful look at the local level in Islamic countries, or like the town in Michigan that the mayor endorsed Donald Trump yesterday, the Muslim town in Michigan? Is that what you're talking about? That peaceful?
Yes, sir, 100%. Yeah. How it's kind of grown from the Midwest or the Middle East out to, like, basically more to USA. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think that we experience, I grew up for a few years in my growing up years in a Muslim country. So I had my first experience with Islamists and jihadis too when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And one of the things that I've noticed as a Westerner that has both worked with folks that are Muslim and lived with some for very brief periods of time, and both professionally and personally too. I would say, so I've met families, wives, kids, played in sports with them, those kinds of things, experienced the same things that they experience. When you're dealing with a group of people at that level, and they're just your garden variety. Like, I'm a garden variety Protestant Christian, and they're your garden variety Muslim family. Generally, the extremist stuff, you don't see that from those kind of families. In the vast majority of those kind of families, you don't see that extremist stuff. Okay, as a matter of fact, there's now that you ask me about it, there is a coalition that should be built around the pro-life issue between Christians and Muslims in this country that is there and waiting to be built so that we can protect those little children that are totally defenseless in the womb, totally, and have totally no voice. And I guarantee you that those of us that are people of faith on both sides in that particular area, I've been thinking about that for a long time. We ought to have a coalition of the willing to support each other along those lines because it's accurate. We all believe the same way that the unborn are the most defenseless human beings there are, and it's our duty to protect them. And Christ even tells us to do that. So that's what I think is going on, and it's unfortunate that the extremists get to hijack the whole society. And there's two sects, major ones, Shia and Sunni, in Islam, and both of those have their extremist elements in it. And this confusion or inaccuracies confusion, inaccuracies, maybe some made up stuff in the history of the Prophet Muhammad, especially in his activities that are documented both not in the Quran. Obviously, Mr. Spencer said that he's only mentioned 4 times and nothing about his life is in the Quran, but in the Hadith that was written 200 years later, or started to be written 200 years later. Those things, whether they're true or not, it's important for us to understand them because he's been elevated to this almost deity type level that you must follow it. But the inaccuracies enable, like Mr. Spencer said, the extremists can pick theirs that they want, and the non-extremist Muslims can pick theirs that they want as far as what to follow about Muhammad, and that only leaves that opening in the faith to allow these extremists to proliferate, because there's a lot of them. I mean, you're not talking about a small part of the Islamic faith worldwide when you take a look at it, really, in my opinion. I think I answered the question. Who's next?
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
We have Sofa, sir.
Thank you, Shell. Hey, Colonel. I'm still kind of looking at the whole ambiguity part, where I've read the Torah, the Bible, the Quran many times, and I have seen that. So the Torah, if it ain't in there, it don't exist. Mm-hmm. And then with the Bible, it was, at least for Catholics, when I was growing up, prior to 1969, if you read the Bible, you weren't a good Catholic. You owned a Bible, you never read it. You just listened to what the priest told you what the Bible said. And the Quran, hearing from your guest today, where the vast majority of Muhammad's teachings exist outside of the Quran, mm-hmm. in the Hadith or the Attar, in the verbal tradition, it almost seems like each one of these builds on the next one, and so that they can dupe their worshipers more effectively. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we got to take a commercial break, so I'll get them when we come back. But all very, very good points. And the key one is most of his teachings were written 200 years after the Quran was allegedly written, and they're not in the Quran. That's a very interesting conundrum for those of us that are trying to understand this part of our civilization, especially in the 21st century. We'll be right back with Training Tuesday, Muhammad, and the Islamic jihadists following him, whether his actions or examples are true or not. I'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
This photo has just been released by the authorities showing one of the suspects, a 19-year-old who is said to have been radicalized by the Islamic State group. Police say the second suspect is 17 and had started a job at the concert venue just days ago. Our arts correspondent, Katie Spencer, gave us this update.
By all accounts, this was a very, very serious and quite well thought out terror plot. They've described it, or they're making these arrests as a tragedy that has been prevented. We know a little bit more detail about exactly what they believe was going to happen. They've said the plan was to kill people outside of the Ernst Happel Stadium. The 17-year-old that has been arrested, that was in communication with the 19-year-old who has been found with these chemical substances at their home. The 17-year-old apparently was being employed by the stadium just a couple of days prior to these arrests being made. Investigators are thoroughly at this stage now searching the 19-year-old's home. They say that just a couple of weeks earlier as well, he is an individual that had uploaded an oath of allegiance to the Islamic State. So they were very certain that they had to act, and they had to bring him in for questioning. Of course, the thing that will be on many people's minds in this country will be, of course, that Taylor Swift's tour was due to come here next week, due to wrap up with 5 final dates. There's no word on whether or not they'll be cancelled. I think that would be unlikely, but certainly from the security people that we've been speaking to, it's likely that the security operation will be a different beast now, will be certainly increased. The beautiful and brilliant thing about these concerts is the lovely community that you get. You get people wanting to spend the day outside of these venues, congregating and meeting, swapping friendship bracelets and that sort of thing. And it would appear that that was the very target of these plans. It is a hard thing to police when it's not just the venue you're policing the wider area as well. So it will be a complicated logistical thing for the Met Police to have to think through. But certainly I would imagine they are now liaising with Austrian police over the intelligence that they've had.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and why Islamic jihadists follow the Prophet Muhammad's examples, whether they're true or not. That's the subject today. We've had on author of his new book, Muhammad, A Critical Biography, Mr. Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, earlier in the show to discuss why he had to write his 3rd book and 2nd biography of Muhammad. And one of the big reasons is that there's very little really that we know for sure that is documentation of this person known as the Prophet Muhammad in Islam and the way he's portrayed today versus the origins of the story of the Prophet and his vision with the angel Gabriel. There's even questions about whether it was really the angel Gabriel or that Muhammad was really this man's name. But it's written now that he's the messenger of Allah. Unfortunately, though, he's not really talked about that much in the Quran, mentioned 4 times. Nothing about his early life or and he was 40 years old by my calculations when his vision or meeting with the angel Gabriel was supposed to have occurred. And the Quran was even really published after his death, which is about 23 years later, during the time of Muhammad's supposed time on earth as being a prophet and an apostle for Allah as a messenger from God. Well, Wib, our guest member in the audience, had a question before the break, and I think the short answer to your question, Wib, is that, you know, most people in Islam are going to the Hadith, which was written hundreds of years after the Quran, and then the Quran connected to that was written after Muhammad's death, from what we can tell, and has very little about him in it. So that distinction, I think, is very interesting, because you don't see anything that's about the detailed elements of his examples, his prophecy, and his teachings in the Hadith earlier in history at all. You know, and Mr. Spencer uses an example about Jesus that Paul the Apostle in the book of Acts quotes Jesus, but the quote he quotes of Jesus was never documented in the Gospels, which are the four Gospels are the documentation of Jesus' life and ministry and death and resurrection on the earth. So if Muhammad was around and these teachings were around in the early days of Islam, people would want to talk about what they knew about the verbal history or any verbal quotes that weren't documented in the Quran or anything, and none of that exists whatsoever. And I think that's a big difference. And I have to come back to you though about the Bible. I'm a Protestant, so I don't need a priest to tell me what's in the Bible. I'm expected to go read it and follow it myself. And that's a basic difference, I think, in some Christian denominations. And that's a big one between Protestants and Catholics. Okay, Shell, who's our next audience member with a question?
We have Jeff, sir.
Good afternoon, Colonel. How are you doing, sir?
Good, Jeff.
I remember seeing the children in Gaza after 9/11, and they were praising after the trade centers were hit. And when people teach their children to hate, it's hard pressed to do business with those type of people, sir. And that's where it is. They teach the children to hate. But with that being said, sir, Barack Obama, I believe his political career is over. And the reason I say this is that Obama, Kerry, Joe Biden, and Hillary Clinton put Iran in a position to arm Hezbollah and Hamas. I do believe his career is over because of that, and then just what happened with the Diddy affair situation that's going on. What's your take on that, sir? And I had one more quick question.
Well, you mean Puffy Combs there? I will take that on. I'm struck by the difference between how that case is being handled in the media and how the Epstein case is being handled, both in regular media, independent media, and social media, because we know more about people that went to P. Diddy's, what they call them, freak-offs. We know who a lot of them are. And officially, on the Epstein list, we don't have anybody that could be held accountable. And that's a big difference, because every person that's on either one of those lists that the Department of Justice has ought to be investigated thoroughly and prosecuted if that's what it means to hold them accountable. Just because you're on a list doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong, but the fact that you are on one of those lists bears investigation. And we have a lot of accountability on that Epstein list that needs to come out, and we need to have accountability on the P. Diddy piece too. But we're getting more information on that than we ever have on the list of clients and stuff on the Epstein list. So I want to see those treated the same way, exactly the same way under the law. It needs to change, that people are being treated different under this under the law in the United States of America. That's not the America that I thought I was growing up in, at least on a regular basis anyway. And it shouldn't be the America that we allow to exist as citizens. We're going to take it back here on November 5th and have a chance to make that change. What's your other question, Jeff?
Copy that, sir. My second question is, I personally need some help in New Mexico with the GOP, sir. I'm here in Roswell, and I want to build one of the largest MROs in the nation here, and our leadership is subpar. We need to get Lou John moved out into 2026. And I was seeing if you could DM me, sir, and help me with that. I want to get Republican to take over the state of New Mexico. That'll be a huge plus, considering this is one of the most important states in the.
Did we lose him?
I'm right here, sir.
Oh, okay, you
copy?
cut out. You cut out at one of the most important states.
The most important states is New Mexico strategically, for obvious reasons, sir. You know those, and I need some help here in New Mexico, and I would like to see if you could DM me so I could run some ideas by you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of New Mexico, some of you know that my last Air Force assignment was as the installation commander at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. So I dealt with a lot of the elected officials there, and quite honestly, they elected a Republican governor. Bill Richardson had to leave the governorship, and they were elected a Republican governor right after that. The mayor of Albuquerque, when I was there, was a Republican, so you have the makings there of good groups of people, and I would be very surprised and disappointed if you couldn't get it going again. Now the Republicans that I ran into there, they weren't exactly hardcore conservatives, but they were Republicans and they loved this country. And none of them have signed up to this craziness like people like Dick Cheney and a lot of those people that we talked about yesterday on that list of 741 that have backed Kamala Harris and all of her diversity, equity, inclusion, critical Marxist theory policies, her policies of opening the border and letting these adversaries in that could potentially kill a lot of Americans, and will when given the opportunity, folks. That's coming. I'll just tell you right now, my assessment is that those kinds of things are coming. It may not happen while I'm still alive. But the reason I showed that clip just now about the Swiftie concert terror attack was because I want the Swifties and the Gen Zers and those folks to know that jihadis are coming for you just like they came for my generation and the generation right after me. They're coming for you, and you got to get on it and be able to defend yourselves and put an end to this, or you will die in much greater numbers than we did, and you'll have a much bigger fight and a longer fight to have to deal with if we don't get this resolved. And we can get this resolved. We're human beings, and as I said, I grew up with Muslims and worked professionally with them for decades and everything, know their families and everything. There is a place to be able to come to agreement with people of the Muslim faith that are our fellow citizens, that are our friends, our allies. The guy running for president named Trump through the Abraham Accords set a good example of how to do that. He was on track to get Saudi Arabia on board, and Saudi Arabia can be brought on board with the Abraham Accords and the state of Israel than any Muslim country can find a way to make peace and to stop the killing, because it's the killing of women and children for the most part, and that's wrong. Well, we're at the end of the show, and tomorrow, Whistleblower Wednesday, I've got Robert Carrillo, who's the chief safety officer of Cancer Doctor. Cancer's increasing rapidly, large numbers of it. A lot of us think we have an idea of one of the reasons why. So we're going to be talking to Mr. Carrillo about that tomorrow on Whistleblower Wednesday here on the Rob Maness Show.